by these other categories of people that you're talking about, where did any other subgroup of people contribute more to civilization?
And white people?
Than Western civilization itself, that's rooted in Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and the United States of America, and every place where the footprint of Christianity settled the world. That's all of Western civilization.
Throughout the centuries, all members of the Phoenician society had a say in the governing of his or her city in the trade partnership conducted by the city. The original decision to govern with equal representation was decided around 3200 BC in Byblos, Lebanon, the main trading and governing capitals. An assembly of all people gathered, and they selected a circle of council members, most probably from the leading families in this city. The council member in turn chose one of their own to be the leader of the group, similar to how mayors are chosen in some cities around the world. The governing model was in existence centuries before Greece or Rome came to power. All cities in the Phoenician trading empire chose their leadership in the same manner. Each city had a leader responsible for governing the administration, trade, relations, and eventually even the religious traditions. Wherever the main Phoenician capital was located, the designated leader of the capital city would serve as the head of the Phoenician leadership group, comprised of leaders from all other cities. When a major decision affecting the entire Phoenician population was upon them, members of the various councils would gather to discuss the issues and be responsible for the decisions. The democratic governing model adopted by the Phoenicians was markedly different from other societies in the ancient time. This could be a potential problem since they didn't want to garner attention from their trading partners or neighboring countries. They knew that it was important to acquire respect from Egypt, of course, their major trading partner. Phoenicia was a vassal of them. To demonstrate this respect, the Phoenicians decided to mirror Egypt and other major trading partners' leadership titles. A crucial decision made. The leaders of each Phoenician city would serve as a king, and the king would manage the Phoenician trading ventures, run the government, and head religious tradition. So to the outside world, the Phoenician government model looked the same as ancient Egypt, the maiden trading partner, but unlike Egypt and in other cultures, Phoenician kings were elected by the population. Outsiders would never comprehend the democratic model of the Phoenicians, and this worked perfectly fine for the Phoenicians. It wasn't that they were deceiving the people, they was into privacy. The seventh Phoenician principle. Imagine what would have transpired had they attracted attention to the degree of their wealth. Any leader with the army who lusted their wealth would attack them and destroy them. To protect the people, the Phoenicians did not discuss their private business or public affairs with others. This practice is still fairly common in Lebanon. The Phoenicians did not follow traditions of other cultures by appointing successors to the kings from the same family like the traditions of England, Spain, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. The king was chosen from the council, whose members was approved by the people. A Phoenician king could easily be removed from office if he did not perform responsibly. Remember, women were equal partners in business and they was in leadership positions in civic community affairs, but women were rarely on the throne in ancient times of Phoenician. The Phoenicians did not want to draw attention to them. Even today in Lebanese, they say they think that the Lebanese are modern day people. So that's why I'm trying to skip over it, because it's just a fallacy. The Phoenician criteria for leadership was about who was the best person for this position. Depending upon the circumstances, kings would transfer from one city to another over time. The seniority of the leaders will also switch over time. Okay, I just wanted to show you that the origin of the democratic process was in Carthage, not in Carthage, but with the Phoenicians, who basically Carthage inherited it, because Carthage had a form of a democratic process as well. They transferred it to it. It's the same people. But what they want you to believe with the Greeks, they want you to believe that Greeks have the origin of democracy. White people don't even use democracy now. It's an oligarchy, just like in Greece. Poor people couldn't vote in Greece and women couldn't vote in Greece. And when white people first came to America, you had to be a white male to own land over 21. And it's the same thing that the Greek structure was. That's why you always see these white folks talking about it, because they want to go back to that structure.
Carthage, a land of opportunity founded more than 2,000 years ago. Driven by wealth, power, and ambition. These pioneers built an empire that dominated the Mediterranean world for over 600 years. By developing some of the ancient world's most groundbreaking technology, both at home and in the far reaches of the known world. The centerpiece, a massive harbor that held hundreds of warships, the vanguard of antiquity's most formidable navy.
These ships are coming up fast. People see them coming. Carthage is here.
But the original legend of Carthage starts in the eastern Mediterranean city of Tyre. The Phoenician city of Tyre and a beautiful woman named Dido, and the jealousy and greed and lust for power that would absolutely rip a royal family apart.
Dido was the beautiful daughter of King Matan. Her husband was an ambitious Phoenician who had met an untimely end. He was murdered by her brother, Pygmalion. Terrified for her life, Dido fled across the Mediterranean from her homeland of Tyre to a no-man's land at the northern tip of Africa. There she bargained with the native people to buy as much land as could be covered with the hide of an ox. Clever and cunning, Dido cut the hide into the thinnest of strips, then arranged them to enclose a large section of fertile land. There, under her governing hand, the fantastic Carthage, or new city, would be engineered.
When they came to Carthage, sized up the bay, looked at the mountains, looked at the flow of the rivers, looked at a place, the Bursa, which would be a great defensible fortress site, they said, this is it. This is where we will build our city.
Dido's settlement, Carthage, quickly prospered. According to legend, tales of its wealth and Dido's beauty spread all the way to Erebus, king of the Moors.
Part of Dido's story is this tale of the king of the Libyan natives, Iarbas, who wishes to marry her, but she refuses to do so. According to the storytellers, it's out of love for her assassinated husband, and she climbs onto a self-built funeral pyre and burns herself up.
It was here, from her ashes, that one of the greatest empires in the known world would rise. Surrounded by bigger powers and with little land, the Phoenicians of Carthage turned to the sea. They were pioneers, pragmatic, open to new ideas, and endlessly innovative.
When Dido established the city, the new city, a lot of people's eyes obviously opened wide and said, hey, a new city, a new start. And as these trading routes that Carthage pioneered expanded, it very rapidly became as international a city as anywhere then in the world.
Over the next 200 years, Carthage evolves into a major Mediterranean power, establishing colonies in Corsica, Ibiza, and North Africa.
By around 700s, maybe 650 BC, Carthage is a force to be reckoned with. Everybody's heard of it. Nobody messes with it. It's a very important city.
Through expansive trade networks, by the 7th century BC, Carthage's new territories were generating a massive treasure chest, and its population reached 300,000, making it one of the biggest cities in the world.
To some extent, you could compare it to a Manhattan. This is a huge population living in a relatively small area. So this is an important commercial and cultural hub, not only for North Africa, but also for the entire Western Mediterranean world.
Before the Carthaginians' grand engineering feats had been launched in the name of the gods, Carthage's focus was closer to home. Like America 2,500 years later, the wealth of Carthage drew legions of people looking to make their fortune. Soon the city's architects and engineers had to find a way to house them all, a challenge that would lead to the most remarkable urban building boom in antiquity.
There was something very important to the Carthaginian spirit, to its psyche, about staying within the walls of Carthage. So So the pressure to design buildings that would accommodate people who wanted to live within the city was very strong.
The Carthaginians would be the first on a massive level to turn the city's sky into private property by building apartments.
These were as high as 6 stories, very densely populated. Why? Because people wanted to come to Carthage. It was a successful, happening place. If you wanted to get on in life, you wanted to come to Carthage.
To build a city for the ages, first they would need materials with which to build it. The answer was located at El Hawaria on Tunis Bay. There in these remote quarries was a seemingly endless supply of limestone that was both easy to work with and quick to put up.
Limestone is the perfect choice for building, and there were limestone depositions geologically in that area, in that basin, very close at hand.
Archaeologists speculate that, like the Egyptians before them, the Carthaginians cut each block of stone using the simplest of means: water and wood.
After they've chiseled a dotted line channel along the face of a rock, they take a wooden wedge, stick it in there, if it's deep enough, and then wet the wood. And what will happen naturally is the wood will expand with the water, and then it'll naturally crack the stone.
The increased pressure from the expanding wood caused the stone to crack in almost perfect lines. From there, workers separated each block using crowbars and other tools. Once the massive blocks of stone were quarried and transported to the city, the Carthaginians used pier and panel style construction to quickly transform Carthage into a dynamic capital.
It's very clear that by using stone in the first place, they weren't ready to pick up and go elsewhere. They were looking down the long term.
For each metropolis to survive, it needs a constant source of running water. Carthage was no different, so the ancient city engineers turned to cisterns like this. Each cistern was made of a double layer of eggshell, ash, and clay, made the cistern absolutely watertight. Every home enjoyed access to a cistern through a series of pipes and channels. Carthaginians had fully equipped bathrooms with tubs and sinks and even showers years before ancient Rome.
And we have clear evidence way before the foundation of Carthage of domestic plumbing. But it is Carthage by 600 BC or thereabouts, and certainly Carthaginian town of Kerkuane by 450 BC, that we have the first evidence of a unified system of water usage and, critically, sewage. Any fool can put in a bathroom, but the question is what you do with the waste water. And at Kerkuane you see very clearly a unified single system that has piped water to the rooms that need it, the kitchen and the bathroom, but then piping the wastewater out to a common sewage system. This was evolutionary, yes, but it is also typically Carthaginian because it's also revolutionary.
By the 6th century BC, Carthage was growing into a true city-state, brimming with magnificent temples, glittering palaces, and high-rise houses. But as Carthage's flame burned brighter, the flame of their Phoenician cousins was burning out. The great Phoenician city of Tyre fell to the Babylonians in 574 BC. Carthage was now on its own. Before long, the Carthaginians would sail beyond the dusty shores of North Africa, continuing to expand their empire by conquering the seas. 520 BC, 3,000 oars propel 60 ships through the Pillars of Hercules, known today as the Straits of Gibraltar. Hanno the Navigator, the great admiral of Carthage, is sailing to the edges of the known world. He is preparing to launch a power play that could lead to total domination of the Mediterranean.
So every great explorer, Christopher Columbus, Vasco da Gama, who's sailed off into the unknown, seems to me a very strong parallel for the original and best of them, Hanno the Navigator.
Hanno set sail to extend the boundaries of the Carthaginian network of colonies and exchange, not mere trading activities, but planting whole cities of new settlers to maintain control of land and access to its resources.
Carthage's technical prowess on the seas has brought it power and wealth. By the 6th century BC, the islands of Corsica, Sardinia, and the Balearic Islands are now under its control. The hub of its power flows from a marvel of engineering, the harbor of Carthage.
This is the absolute pinnacle of Carthaginian engineering.
Although records are shaky, archaeologists believe it may have been constructed as early as the days of Hanno. But at the height of her power, in the 2nd century BC, the harbor of Carthage was transformed, technologically superior to any maritime facility in the world, and the very lifeblood of Carthage.
It was part of Carthage, it was the heart of Carthage, it was the lungs of Carthage, it was everything to Carthage, both naval and commercial.
The harbor had a common entrance from the sea that was 70 feet wide, which could be closed with iron chains. Inside its gates were 2 separate marinas, the first for the traders and merchant vessels.
The mercantile harbor, the commercial harbor, was organized with conventional wharves to make as easy as possible the loading and unloading of goods. So in Carthage, readily one can imagine in, say, 400 BC, you would see all the goods there were in the then known world being bought, being brought, being sold in Carthage.
The second, a circular harbor, was designed for military use. A series of 30 docks were arranged symmetrically. Another 140 additional berths radiated out on the perimeter of the circular port, allowing the entire harbor to hold 220 boats. Today, a lone dry dock has been excavated, a reminder of the strength the harbor once commanded.
This is all that's left of the Kothon, or military harbor of ancient Carthage. A kothon was an interior port carved out of the land as opposed to an exterior port attached to the seaside. Now, with all these beautiful villas around here, it's kind of hard to imagine that this harbor was the launch point for the wealth and power of ancient Carthage. Now, the nerve center for this maritime hub was that circular island out there where there were 40 or 50 slots for boat dry dock. And on top of that island was a big tower where trumpeters would blare signals and heralds would deliver orders and admirals would oversee operations like observing what ships were coming in from sea, be they friend or foe, while at the same time those ships couldn't very well observe what was going on in this port.
Nobody has anything approaching this potency, this power, let alone this navigational and seafaring skill. So when the barriers are taken off the channel and within, they're scrambled, as they did in World War II with aeroplanes, these ships are coming out fast down this channel and out into the Mediterranean. People see them coming. Carthage is here.
A book was published that laid bare the very roots of Western civilization. It argued that the cradle of Europe, ancient Greece, had origins in Africa and the East, and that the West should recognize what it owed to Black and Eastern cultures. This spring, a second volume is being published. The book is Black Athena. The Parthenon, symbol of classical Greece, is being rebuilt. As the architects and masons repair the broken stones, their aim is to preserve the image that we have of it now, bleached white and standing alone, not brightly painted and enclosed by other buildings as it was originally. But are we interested in having an accurate picture of this ancient civilization? Or have we reconstructed its past to fit our present? happened that during the last 200 years, scholars rewrote the history books, denying that ancient Greece had roots in Africa and Asia. The myth they created of a pure white, unsullied dawn of Western civilization was a result of both anti-Semitism and racism. And he argues it still influences the perception the West has of itself today.
I think that if people take Black Athena seriously, then they do have to look at our European early history in a different way. Because always implicit and sometimes explicit in our view of history is that democracy and science and philosophy are exclusively European possessions. And that although peoples from other continents can learn them through Europe and European culture, they are essentially at home only in Europe.
In the tomb of Rekhmiri, dating from 1450 BC, wall paintings represent people of the Aegean offering tributes to the pharaoh. In Black Athena, Martin Bernal uses this, together with a wide range of other archaeological, linguistic and documentary evidence, to argue his case for substantial contact between Egypt and the Aegean in the Bronze Age. He also relies on the traditions of the classical Greeks themselves.
How it happened that the Egyptians came to the Peloponnese and what they did to make themselves kings in that part of Greece has been chronicled by other writers. I will add nothing, therefore, but proceed to mention some points which no one else has touched upon. The names of nearly all the gods came to Greece from Egypt.
The Greek historian Herodotus, often quoted as the father of history, wrote those lines 1,000 years later during the classical period. Critics voice their strongest doubts over Bernal's approach to language and word derivations, or etymologies. In the 19th century, linguists were able to trace 40 to 50% of Greek words to a language family known as Indo-European, from which most other European languages had also evolved. But Bernal is trying to account for the other missing half.
I am a language junkie. That when I see something about an obscure language, I'm tempted by it. And I was in Heifers, and I saw an etymological dictionary of Coptic. Now this may not appeal to many people, but to my strange tastes it was extraordinarily attractive. So I picked it out, and I started looking at Coptic words and the ancient Egyptian roots that they had. And I suddenly began to see that maybe some of the Greek words that are not explained in terms of Indo-European, I hadn't been able to find Semitic roots for, might well have Egyptian roots.
In the Aegean, 75 miles north of Crete, lies the island of Thera. A huge volcanic eruption blew the island apart in 1628 BC. Just 20 years ago, under the volcanic debris, the remains of a sophisticated Bronze Age city were uncovered. Better preserved than the Roman Pompeii, excavators believe they've only revealed 1/30th of the whole site, known as Akrotiri. Bernal believes that the population of the city had close contacts with the Egyptians.
These slides come from the buried city of Akrotiri on the island of Thera, which was overwhelmed by an eruption in 1628 BC. And they're by far the earliest paintings we have from Greece of any extent, that's excluding Crete. Now here we have a section of a much longer painting of a number of boats And there's been some argument as to what these boats represent. But what came as a surprise to the archaeologists who discovered them was the very strikingly Egyptian features to be found. Now here we have a short section of a much longer river scene that's admitted by all scholars to be Nilotic, or that's a conventional description of it. And this is because the plants, you can see the palm trees and the animals like the goose and the naturalistic animals belong to the types found in Egypt in reality and in Egyptian painting.
establishing black rule again since the fall of Carthage. At its height, Cordova, the heart of the Moorish territory in Spain, was the most modern city in Europe. The streets were well paved with raised sidewalks for pedestrians. During the night, 10 miles of streets were illuminated by lamps. This was hundreds of years before paved streets in Paris or street lamps in London. Cordova had 900 public baths. We are told that a poor Moor would go without bread rather than without soap, which makes my next slide more interesting. I named it Dirty Europeans because I'll let it speak for itself. As one Roman ambassador to the French noted, His Majesty Louis stunk like a wild animal. Russians were not so finick about bathing and tended to bathe fairly regularly, relatively speaking, generally at least once a month. Because of this, they were considered perverts by many Europeans for bathing once a month. They were perverts. So we have to understand who we are dealing with. King Louis' stench came from the fact that his physicians advised him that bathing as infrequently as possible to maintain good health. So this man is the king of a whole entire nation, and his physicians are telling him to not take a bath because it is good for his health. He also stated the fact that he found the act of bathing disturbing. He didn't even like taking baths. He said the whole act of bathing itself was disturbing. This is the people we dealing with, man. This bloodline still here. These people didn't just disappear. Because of this, he said he only had bathed twice in his lifetime. Another in this gruesome twosome class among the aristocracy was Queen Isabel I of Spain, who once confessed that she had taken a bath only twice in her lifetime, when she was first born and when she got married. I know her husband was happy that she at least took one. She at least took one when they was getting married, but golly, the gruesome twosome, huh? And Isabel was the queen in charge of Spain at that time for Europeans when they expelled the Moors and started the Inquisition, which we still living under right now. This is the description of the Moors. The as leopards, and their riders fiercer than a wolf in sheepfold at night. The noble Goths, the German rulers who sat Rome at that time, were broken in an hour. The people who was ruling, the German Visigoths was ruling Spain when we invaded. They were the first people we smashed. They were broken in an hour, quicker than the tongue can tell. Quicker than the tongue can tell. And this is from In the Golden Age of the Moors by Ivan van Sertima, page 336. Alright, this is the system of Tawhid I was telling you about. So, the Trinitarians at that time, they finally got them a new message, and instead of, coexisting with people, they didn't want to do that though. They were basically using the same way that modern day Arabs, they're using Islam as a form of nationalism, but they're not letting you know that they're practicing nationalism because they're trying to hide behind the banner of Islam to do their dirt. But the oppressive Trinitarians contributed to the rise of Islam. When the new force Islam became known in the Levant, Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt, and the new armies began to edge the Roman Empire, the Unitarian force of North Africa realized that they shared much in common with this new religion. Both believed in the oneness of God, same culture, similar language, and let's not forget the same enemy. The Golden Age, the rise of this black empire was fueled by trade and education. We had to study and use what made our ancestors powerful and successful. These are a few routes, trade routes, that early Muslims used. Notice that they weren't just local. When you trade, you dominate the world. They had the Mediterranean on lock, for the most part, the Indian Ocean, for the most part. At that time, the Atlantic Ocean, closer to Africa, was actually called the Ethiopian Ocean. So it was no way that they could rule the world. Once you own this Mediterranean, they can't get out of there. They wasn't selling from over here because they thought the world was flat. Moorish education. The vast contrast in intellectual activity could be demonstrated by just one example. In the 9th century, the library of the monastery of St. Gall was the largest in Europe. It boasted 36 volumes at the time. Cordoba's library contained over 500,000. So this is what we're dealing with. We have to take over our educational system. We have to. Moreover, studying at college was first applied by Muslims. Universities appeared in Muslim countries in the late 1600s and the early 700s, while leading colleges like Oxford and the University of Paris were founded in the 13th century. So 700 years ahead of these people. 700. So they wasn't bathing. They really wasn't publicly educating each other. Amazingly, early European universities was also founded by trusts, similar to Islamic ones. So this is the business structure. They was using universities as trust systems. Some historians even trace old European colleges back to the Islamic systems, as their internal organization was very similar to Islamic ones. For example, the idea of graduates, a sahib, and undergraduate is derived directly from Islamic terms. And see, they're using the word Islamic and Muslim, but at the end of the day, these are black people. That's just a banner. And even at that time, though, Muslim really wasn't applied to the people who was practicing it. That's something that we're superimposing on it. But we can show that these people at a point in time under the name Musulmani had a name similar to Muslim. But these are people who brought a solid educational system into Europe. Timbuktu University. Timbuktu was a destination for merchants from the Middle East and North Africa. Since most, if not all of these traders were Muslim, the mosque would see visitors constantly. The temple accumulated a wealth of books from throughout the Muslim world, becoming not only a center of worship, but a center of learning. Books became more valuable than any other commodity in the city, and private libraries sprouted up in the homes of local scholars. Scholars wrote their own books as a part of a social economic model. Scholars wrote their own books as a part of a social economic model. We gotta educate our own self. Educating ourselves is its business and its own self. And don't be mad at me for saying it's a business because you're paying these Europeans. When I was at Prairie View, my teacher wrote the book for the class. with copying these books and any other books. Today, there are over 700,000 manuscripts in Timbuktu, with many of them dating back to the West African Golden Age between the 12th and 16th century. But we got to get over our own educational system. Translating hieroglyphs. Before any European translated the hieroglyphs using a Rosetta Stone, Black Muslims had books and proofs of being the first. It was easy for them to do it because the Egyptian hieroglyphs are the origin of all Afro-Asiatic languages. This is from Ibn Washia, and you can find this in Paris. This is symbols, and I just wanted to show you some examples from his work. This is medieval time. Black people was in these pyramids or in these scripts trying to translate these texts before European. It wasn't no secondhand research. It wasn't reading no Gardner. It wasn't reading no Champollion translation. They was doing it themselves, translating it themselves like we need to do. First-hand resource. Let's get in ourselves.
So what makes a nation? Is it simply anyone who lives within the borders of a country, or is there something more to it? We're debating that question right now in the Netherlands, which is holding an election on Wednesday. One of the top polling parties is the Party for Freedom. It's led by Geert Wilders, who has called for halting Muslim immigration into that country and pulling the Netherlands out of the European Union. Congressman Steve King of Iowa recently started a debate here in this country when he tweeted in support of Wilders. He wrote this: Wilders understands that culture and demographics are our destiny. We can't restore our civilization with someone else's babies. Well, King's comment was denounced as bigoted by many, including the Speaker of the House, but he has not apologized. Congressman King joins us tonight to explain. Congressman, thanks for coming on.
Oh, thanks for having me on, Tucker. I appreciate it.
So you've seen the reviews, obviously, of your tweet, and the left was merciless. I mean, some of them were unbelievable. John Lewis called you bigoted and racist. Anna Navarro at CNN said you're an embarrassment to the human race. The Speaker of the House, your speaker, said he'd like to believe that you misspoke. Did you misspeak, and what did you mean when you wrote that?
No, Tucker, I didn't misspeak at all. I said exactly what I meant. And this is a message over to Europe, over to the Netherlands, a message to Geert Wilders, who does understand this. But the birth rates in especially Western Europe, but also Eastern Europe and in the United States, all of Western civilization have gone down below the replacement rate, with the exception of Israel, as the only Western civilization, first world country that has a birth rate that's above the death rate. And so we have to do something to increase our birth rate, or the vacuum that's created will be filled by people that don't believe in our values here in Western civilization. And we're seeing it happen in the Netherlands and all across Europe. And that's a lot about what the race is about that's coming up here in a couple of days in the Netherlands.
So the solution to that in the United States has simply been to import people from other countries, and that increases the population, despite the fact that the birth rate of native-born Americans is pretty low. That's not an adequate solution. You say, why?
Well, I say not, because you ask about a country in the beginning in your opening. A country, a nation state needs to have a sense of a common history, a common culture, a common civilization, common experiences that bind us together. And we went through a re-assimilation period, or an assimilation period, from about 1924 until the mid-60s, because our leadership in Congress understood we needed to have a time to bond back together, become Americans together, again, because of the high immigration that we had in the previous, say, 20 or 30 or 40 years.
Right.
And so we're at this place now in America where we're seeing people marching in the streets that are pushing back against the American culture and the American civilization. And it's troubling to me that over the last 25 years, we've essentially phased out the promotion of assimilation, and we promoted instead multiculturalism and diversity as if it were our strength. And in fact, they're using it now to divide us, and that's what Barack Obama did throughout his presidency.
let's see, what's the number for this piece? It just says a woman with plaited hair. It doesn't say anything about them being African. But anybody, Stevie Wonder, could look at that and tell you who that is. So that's one piece, and then I'm going to take you down here and we're done. It's from Greece. Look at the vase. I've seen about 15 of these now in museums around the world and mostly Europe. But look at the face of the African in Greece almost 2,500 years ago. Here's an African shoeshine boy. And here is one of the most important pieces, but you have to look carefully. Now this is Andromeda, an Ethiopian princess. But she doesn't look terribly Ethiopian there. But if you look at the people that she's leaning on, for example, the hair, it's pretty kinky hair. Andromeda, according to the Greeks in Greek mythology, was the daughter of the king and queen of Ethiopia. The word Ethiopia is Greek, and it means the land of the burnt-faced people. And the word Ethiopia didn't apply to the Ethiopia of today. It was mostly a term that was used to denote the area south of Egypt, mostly the Sudan. Now, Andromeda married Perseus, the Greek hero who slew the Medusa, the Gorgon, and cut off her head. You know, the woman with the which might have been locks. And they have a child named Perseus. And Perseus becomes the basis of the historical country of Persia. And the Andromeda Galaxy, the largest galaxy in the universe, is named after an African woman. Isn't that interesting? The largest galaxy in the universe is named after an